What's going on, guys? So I'm going to do the top 10 trap cards in the current format. So now, these trap cards are going to be very my choice cards that I feel like that are helpful in the game. They're not necessarily always work in every single deck, but they're still cards that you should try to put into your deck or try to side or are important in the game to help you out. Once again, not going to be necessarily work in every single deck, but as a whole, I feel like these are the top 10 best traps you can play. So, with that being said, the first one, number 10, is going to be Call of the Haunted. Now, why I picked Call of the Haunted is because, just like Asian Eyes used to say when Monster Reborn got banned, and he used to say this a lot, I don't know if he says it as much anymore because I haven't really watched much of his Yu-Gi-Oh videos, but he always used to mention how Call of the Haunted is actually such a very underrated card because it is basically the ability Monster Reborn, except it's a little bit slower, but you can play 3 of them. And having that effect to bring back a monster that is very essential in your deck back, even monsters that aren't very essential, is just such a helpful thing in this format, in this game. And while it might not work in every single deck, there are definitely decks that benefit from it, and you have been seeing more decks slowly play 1 or 2 Call of the Haunted because it can be very helpful to a specific deck. So, for number 10 is Call of the Haunted. Now, for number 9, I have chosen Bottomless Trap Hole. So now the reason why I chose Bottomless Trap Hole for number 9 is because, while it is a great card, you don't see people play it as much as often. You definitely still see people play. So I'm not saying it's not bad. I'm not saying you're a bad player if you play it. A lot of people still play this card. I play this card. But it only destroys 1 monster, and then it banishes it. And it does not negate. And in this game, not being able to negate a summon, but it's still a card that destroys a monster on the summon, is not as good as Bottomless Trap Hole when you have other options and when the deck is slim on the amount of traps you are going to play. So if Bottomless Trap Hole gets cut from your deck, it's probably because it cannot negate and there are better cards to suit it. So, you could also say Compulse. I didn't put Compulse on this list, but I felt like Bottomless was stronger than Compulse, though, when it came to this, because it still had the banishing ability, and having monsters banished is a lot better in this game. So, that actually leads on to our number 8, which is Torrential Tribute. So now I picked Torrential Tribute because its ability that it destroys everything. Now, that might sound very vague and not very specific, but it's the same reason of playing a Raigeki. Or a Dark Hole for that matter. A lot of cards being destroyed is not the greatest thing in this game. I mean, cards can come back, get their abilities off the graveyard. It's destroying is not great. But the ability to negate OTKs to some degree, or just destroy your opponent who's summon 2 or 3 monsters and then they summon their 4th and you just get rid of their whole field. Like I said, cannot always be good because they can rejuvenate, but even with decks that can rejuvenate and come back off the grave and keep having a field, you are still setting them back. Regardless of what you decided to do to get rid of their field, Torrential just helped it become quicker, and now it's destroyed. Once again, not the best card, that's why it's number 8, but it's still a very good card, and I feel like you still see people play it occasionally as their staple. So to get on with a more different changing of style of card is number 7, Skill Drain. Now I picked Skill Drain because it is such a great card. Now you don't see as many decks playing it because it's very deck specific. You usually see anti-meta decks take it. Dark Worlds is a very good example of a deck that plays Skill Drain because it can get away with not having... Its effects are not really hindered by Skill Drain. Having Skill Drain in the field does not negate them, and it can make non-meta decks a little bit more viable because Skill Drain really messes up an opponent. So, having these effects negated is so good that having slower decks that can utilize Skill Drain effectively can make meta decks that can't utilize Skill Drain more on an even playing field, if that makes sense. So I really like Skill Drain. It's a great card, but very deck specific. So going on with the thoughts of Skill Drain, going to Soul Drain. Now I love Soul Drain because decks play off the graveyard so much, but it's only at 1, but I know why it's at 1, because so many decks play off the graveyard, and if we could get rid of that effect thing, I wish we could. It's not that I have anything against playing off the graveyard, it's just that so many decks are like, oh, when your deck is card sent to the graveyard, when your card's sent to the graveyard. It's just starting to get repetitive. So, any deck pretty much anywhere, not any, okay, not all, but most play off the graveyard. So Soul Drain is such a great card. Once again, if your deck is very off the graveyard, it's not as viable, so it's more deck specific, just like Skill Drain. But in some decks, people can utilize Skill Drain and Soul Drain along with our next card very well, which makes a very great deck. So, Soul Drain is our number 6. So now with number 5, and it's going in the same effect of these, is something that I'm complaining about constantly, and I already complained about, is playing out the graveyard, and our number 5 is Macrocosmos. Macrocosmos with Masked Heroes is just a great combo as it is, because Macrocosmos being able to take away, once again, your opponent's ability to use the graveyard, and I've already said this 1,000 times, so I'm going to stop saying it, is so important in this game because so many people use it. So if your deck can utilize Macrocosmos, it is so essential and such a great card, and even decks that don't usually utilize it, side deck it, just because it can mess up your opponent so much if they don't have an answer for that card, just like in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! So it can really hinder your opponent, and it's always a great card to have, and it's a very annoying card to play against when your opponent's playing it. So number 4 is Anti-Spell Fragrance. Now, Anti-Spell Fragrance is more of a side deck card. You don't usually see people maining it, not saying they don't, but the reason why people side it is because it's not necessarily something you want to have in your deck all the time until you figure out what you're playing against. Not always the case with most cards that people play, but I still had to put it in here because I'm still shocked that this card's not banned. I mean, both players must set spell cards before activating them and cannot activate them until their next turn. It's just crazy. And it's such a good card to play against specific decks. I mean, I used to play this against not Spell Worlds. What the hell am I talking about? Spellbooks all the time back in the day. It was such a useful card, and it's still useful to this day. And I think I put it higher on the list just simply because of how useful it has been for so long, and is still side decked so consistently, is why I put it on number 4. But number 3 is a card that pretty much every deck plays to some degree, and is so useful and so important in our current format and past formats and probably future formats to come, is Vanity's Emptiness. This card is awesome. You special summon, you get a field going, you flip Vanities, your opponent's aft. Unless if they have an answer, just like everything else in this game, which not always the case. If your opponent does not have an answer to Vanities, it is such a hindrance that it can be almost game-changing. If you cannot special summon or do something to get your opponent to get rid of that card, you are pretty much done. Especially if your opponent has a field stacked before he activated it. That is the most useful play. Now, sometimes that's not always the viability. Sometimes you have to activate Vanities as like a last-ditch effort to give yourself some time. But Vanities is a wonderful, great card. Now, it's not number 1 just because if you have to play any other card, whether it be something to draw or anything else, it goes to the graveyard. But it's still a very useful card in this game, and you'll continue to see people using it until one day if it gets banned. So that's why I put Vanities as number 3. So now, number 2, I put Solemn Warning. Now, some people might be wondering, why Solemn Warning up here? I mean, you have 2,000 life points, is because negate a summon or activation and destroy that card. The monster effect, when a monster would be summoned, or when a spell or trap card or effect monster is activated that includes an effect that special summons. Yeah, the fact that it covers so many summon bases, sorry, I had to reread it to make sure I understand how I explain this. It's such a good card, though. The reason that it covers so many bases is to negate a summon is great. It can negate a pendulum summon. It can negate a summon by instant fusion. It can just negate things, and that allows your opponent to not counteract back with a monster effect. Like, okay, Bottomless, if your monster's effect was it cannot be destroyed by anything, Bottomless is not going to destroy that card. So that's why I like Solemn, and it's just a great card. You'll see people still playing it. Now, 2,000 life points is still kind of a thing, but that's why people will always play this card. It is such a great card, and I was saddened when it cut down to 1, because I remember my Solemn trio, Solemn Warning, and then two Solemn Warnings, and Solemn Judgment was such a great thing formats and formats ago. But now we have 1 Solemn Warning, but it's here to stay. But we have a better one. Our number 1 card that I've been loving a lot is Solemn Strike. I love this card. People are playing 3 of this in every deck. When a monster be special summoned or a monster effect is activated, you pay 1,500 life points and you negate that summoner activation, and if you do, destroy that card. It is so good. Now, I know it's not as specific as Solemn Warning, but that's okay, because Solemn Strike fits its purpose well enough to take out your opponent. It is such a great card, and there's a reason why people play 3. Because it's when monster or monsters would be special summoned. You can negate multiple summons at once. It has it at 3, which already gives it advantage over every other card pretty much listed on this deck. Yeah, I think every other card is listed is at 1. So the fact that it's at 3 has an amazing ability to negate your opponent. I feel like it makes it the most useful card in this game right now that everybody should be playing if your deck can utilize it. Once again, not every deck utilizes traps. So if your deck utilizes traps, it is pretty much essential to a deck at this point. So let me know down below, what would you pick or what would you change on this list? What traps would you add or not add? Remember, it has to fit all sorts of decks. Can't be deck specific. It has to be able to go in any sort of deck, or can somewhat fit in it, or it fits on a variety of decks. Because of course, not every single one of these cards is going to fit in a deck. It's more as a broad spectrum. So let me know down below, and I'll see you later, guys. Peace out.
Damn. Yeah.